Welcome to Kino Society with Owen Shapiro. In today's episode, we have Matt Villa, a film editor whose commitment to the filming process has proved him the opportunity to collaborate on some of the finest international film productions. Matt won both the Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts Award and the Film Critics Circle of Australia Award for Best Editing on his work on Baz Luhrmann's big screen adaptation of the classic The Great Gatsby. Welcome to Kino Society, Matt. Would you mind telling us a bit about your background and what attracted you to do editing above other industry jobs?
I think as a child who grew up in the 70s and 80s, I know it's a huge cliche to say that Star Wars was a big influence in me getting into storytelling. I think I was always I always loved films, but Star Wars was the thing, as you know, so many people before me have said that the bringing together of picture and music and sound in such an extraordinary way really just blew my mind as a young sort of 7-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever, I just loved it. And from that point, I skipped over the whole wanting to be an astronaut and wanting to be a fireman stage, and I just always wanted to be in film because I've always loved storytelling. I've always been a passionate creative writer, and I just was really attracted to the visual medium of film. As far as what got me into editing specifically, I always had a dream to be a director, a writer and director, which that hasn't happened yet. Editing was always felt that to be that the closest thing to having that control over the storytelling process, where you took all the elements and put them together in a narrative, which was always what I was really the most interested in. And while I harbour dreams that one day the directing chair might be filled by me, right now editing is that's what I love the most. When I first went to the film school that I went to here in Australia, the first part of the course was sampling, doing a little sample of sound or cinematography or editing. We had to try them all, and I really loved them all. But as I say, cinematography is a very specialised thing, and sound is a very specialised thing. Whereas editing, it feels like you're taking all of those elements and you get to kind of weave the story together. And that was what I was most interested in. So that's how the direction I went.
So, what skills in particular are needed to be an editor?
Probably the first thing that's the most important is a sense of rhythm. And by editing, there's very much a musicality to editing. That musicality obviously changes because you depending on what sort of film you're working on or what sort of scene you're working on, the rhythm changes. But there's a real need to be aware of what's propelling the scene forward. If it's an emotional scene, obviously it's not as fast paced, but you really need to know where the emotion is and what gives you that emotion. Be it you might be holding on a shot of the person talking, but just as importantly, it's holding on a shot of the person listening and seeing what their reaction is and so on. In a similar sense, if it's an action scene, obviously things get a little pacier, but you're always having to sort of grapple with that sense of keeping the audience engaged without overwhelming them, but also without boring them. And I think you can have courses and you can have books and so on, but there is a certain sense of that just is within the person, that sense of rhythm, that sense of timing, I think is what helps sort of construct a story. The other big thing about being an editor, which is kind of unfortunate, I suppose, but it really is a lot about the political handling of there's always a lot of big egos in a cutting room with producers and directors and so on. Not necessarily bad egos, just big egos. And a lot of the editor's job is arbitrating opinions and taking the best of everyone's opinions and applying them. So I'd say I use the word unfortunate. It's not unfortunate. It's just a part of the job where it's probably 70% talent and 30% political nous as to how to sort of handle the various characters that make their way into a cutting room.
So what's your favorite thing about being an editor?
Very much so. There's a thing that happens when you're cutting a film. Probably my, if I can start with my least favorite part, is the initial assembly, when you've got a load of footage that's just coming through the door from the shoot, and it's just that initial slog of putting together that first run. It's similar to writing a first draft of a story, or even when you sit down to write an email. You know, there's that kind of putting it. There's nothing more scary than being faced with a blank page, and similarly, there's nothing more scary than being faced with a blank screen, I guess, a blank timeline. But once that slog is done and you've got everything kind of down, that's when the fun begins, because you can go through and really start honing and refining the performances. And that's the most fun part, is really exploring the performance of a character or an actor or a scene or whatever it may be, and just honing it down until you're really confident that you're telling the story in the best possible way. And the other thing that I love is when you've got an editorial problem that you can't solve, and I call it my aha moment. And it happens, there's lots of films where it happens, where you're trying to solve a particular problem or convey a particular piece of storytelling, and it just eludes you. But then, it'll just come to you, and you'll realize that there's a perfect pair of shots that click together, or a perfect sequence of shots that sort of go together. And that's when you really go, aha, that's how I do it. And that's what I love. That's what I cherish. And that always happens. There's always a difficult scene, and there's, generally speaking, a way around it, and you just got to sort of sit and explore it. And as long as you have the time to do so, the right solution may not necessarily be it definitely would never be the only solution, but hopefully the right solution will come to you. And that's what I love. I love those. Basically, I just love the conveying of the best story that you possibly can tell.
So you already mentioned the Star Wars movies a while back. But do you have any favorite movie in particular?
Oh, Owen, there's so many. I would probably say my go-to, if I can say a couple, I'll say that Back to the Future to me is almost the perfect film. It's the perfect combination of performance and action and storytelling, a pace and heart. And I think it's just it's very, very close to being a perfect film. I would have to say that I love, and there's so many, but I love the film Stand By Me, because I think that I think one of the keys to having a favorite film is something that really speaks to you personally. And the Rob Reiner film Stand By Me, really the heart of that really speaks to me, and some of my experiences growing up, even though it was an American film and I'm an Australian, but there's some of those sort of childhood angst and childhood sort of concerns and friendships and stuff are pretty universal, and I really love that film. Another film that springs to mind is, as I mentioned to you before, The Shawshank Redemption. That's a film that really strikes me as how you can be very, very considered and not necessarily fast-paced in your storytelling or editing, but really just strike an extraordinary balance of emotion and engagement in a film. But they're just three. I mean, there's so many, but yeah, they're the ones that spring to mind right now.
So you're a fan of Stephen King?
Big fan of Stephen King. Yeah, big fan of Stephen King. Actually, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. Two Stephen King films right there. Yeah, very much so.
So what does a movie need for you to say, what a good job of editing?
Funnily enough, I would have to say that if you can't see the editing, you consider that a great job at editing. And by that I mean, if you feel emotionally fulfilled without feeling like you've been sort of pushed in a certain direction. Or in the case of, say, like an action film, if you feel geographically grounded, there's so many, a lot of the sins of a lot of editors these days is good editing means fast editing, and that's just not true. And I think of any number, and I'm not dissing on Marvel films or any of those sort of Transformers films or anything like that, but a lot of those films fall into the trap of they cut so fast and so busily that you've got no idea where you are geographically, and you can that can sometimes take you out of the movie and confuse you. I think if you walk away from a film having felt that you knew exactly what you were doing, or where you were and what you were feeling and what you needed to feel without being pushed in any of those directions, I think that's a great thing. And so that's why my answer probably is, if you can't notice the editing, that's the sign of a well cut film, because it means that you've been completely immersed in the story, and you've been obviously taken for the ride by the editor and the director and the filmmakers, but not felt that you've been sort of left sort of wanting for more, or felt confused or jarred as to how you're meant to feel.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about modern blockbusters or like superhero movies. Those one of my biggest gripes with them is just how fast they go, and it's annoying. It's very annoying. Are there any editors that you admire or follow?
Again, so many. I've got a lot of close friends that are wonderful editors, but probably there's those people that spring to mind who formed collaborations with directors, like Robert Zemeckis often used. He's retired now, but he often used Arthur Schmidt as his editor for all of those films that I love so much. Back to the Future and Roger Rabbit and Forrest Gump and Castaway and so on. They had a great collaboration. Obviously, the Steven Spielberg Michael Kahn collaboration is a wonderful one. There's a wonderful editor who I also consider to be a dear friend, is Paul Hirsch. He actually cut Star Wars, one of the editors on Star Wars. He also cut Ferris Bueller's Day Off and some of those great films of the 80s, and for the first Mission Impossible film. He's a wonderful editor. There's so many. There's lots of Australian editors. Jill Bilcock is who I know personally, is a great editor as well. Yeah, there's a few, but they're just to name some of them.
What about directors? Do you have any favorite ones of those?
Well, probably I'd definitely have to say Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis again. I feel like a broken record. Sorry. I really like Rob Reiner as a director. Christopher Nolan, obviously. Baz Luhrmann. I mean, I've worked with Baz Luhrmann a number of times, and I think, apart from getting on very well with him and working well together with him, I think he's one of the few guys that, not rare by any means, but one of the few real auteurs that sort of have a distinct style and a very recognizable style. And I think that's a good thing. You don't necessarily have to have a director that's got a distinguishable style, but it's nice when they're there. George Miller's another one. Who have that sort of unique vision, I guess.
Is there a project that you would consider your best work?
There's probably a few for different reasons, but I think and I've loved every job I've ever done. There's very few times where I've walked away from a job not having had a great time with both the people or the project. But I think that one of the films that I'm most proud of, I think, is a film that you may or may not have seen called Predestination. It was a Speary Brothers movie with Ethan Hawke and Sarah Snook in it, and it's a time travel film. And I think what I'm the most proud of with that film is it was a wonderfully written script by the Speary Brothers, but there were some challenges in the cutting room just with the nature of the film. And if you haven't seen it and you're going to see it, I won't give it too much away because it's got a massive spoiler at the very end of it, which would give it too much away. But it involves time travel, and it was quite a challenge because there was parts of the story that needed to give away enough so the audience weren't confused. That you needed to hold back enough so that they weren't ever ahead of the game. And that was quite a challenge. And I know that's not a rare, several films, would face that, but that was the one that I've worked on that really needed that kind of correct balance to make it work. And and I feel really proud of that of the way that came out. Yeah, and another film that there's a couple of others. The Great Gatsby I'm quite proud of, just because it was such a big job, and to have sort of wrangled all that into a manageable film, I think was a challenge which I really enjoyed. Water Diviner, which was directed by Russell Crowe. Some directors are particularly collaborative and let you do what you do best, and Russell was a very, very wonderful collaborator, but very generous collaborator. So he was very sort of, even though it was all his vision, he very much handed over and allowed me to sort of make a lot of creative choices, which I'm really proud of. So yeah, there's a few. I mean, I'm proud of every film, but there's just a couple of sort of highlights, I guess.
Do you ever go to the set of a movie you edit?
Yeah, quite often. Generally speaking, you're nearby when they're shooting, so you tend just to sort of visit set, even if for no other reason to say hello, but often to show the director some rough assemblies of what he's shooting, so that you may assemble a scene and realise that they need to get something further, to shoot something further, so you can go down and talk to them about that. But yeah, I really love the hustle and bustle of set. In fact, the film I'm working on right now, the Baz's Elvis movie, is being shot in another state to where I am, and our borders are closed down here in Australia, so I can't be up there. I'm working remotely, and I'm kind of missing it. I kind of miss being sort of near set and the hustle and bustle of the set.
Do you have any future projects that are coming up?
Well, I'll be involved in Elvis now, the Elvis biopic, for a while. We're just about at the end of shoot. We've got one more month of shoot to go. It'll be about a year in post-production, so it's kind of filled the dance card for now. And then what lies beyond that, I'm not too sure.
A while back, I asked you about what things you like to see in movies in terms of editing. But are there any movies in particular that made you think this is bad editing?
Oh yeah, wow. I think probably similar to what we both mentioned earlier. It's just those films, and they're becoming more and more now, unfortunately, where I would have to sort of say the Transformers films as an example, not to pick them out singularly, but as an example of things that you watch this, or the recent Justice League film, where you just watch them and you kind of get to a point where it's sensory overload. A lot of editing is about finding ebbs and flows in stories. I think, as we both kind of mentioned earlier, when talking about bad editing, and I don't want to be insulting to the people working on those shows, but I think things like Transformers, or the last Justice League film as an example, where just you watch them and you're exhausted. Like there's a sensory overload that just happens, and the trick with editing is, it's all about ebbs, and you've got to find ebbs and flows. You can't just sort of be ramp up the energy to 11 and leave it there, because the audience gets tired and they get exhausted and they've got no idea what's going on. And I think you leave a lot of these modern superhero films, again, not to pick on them, but that they are sort of guilty of it, where they have these fight scenes and you have no idea what's going on. You don't know where you are geographically, and it's just too fast, and you got to help the audience along. Spoon feed the audience, but it's your responsibility to let them give them the tools to follow the story. And a lot of those films fail in that, to me, that you've got no idea where you are, or it's just so chaotic that it's just exhausting, and you tend to tune out after a while. So I think, that to me is bad editing, is when you're not giving the audience the chance to keep up.
Yeah, a lot of times those movies just look like a mess of CGI everywhere.
Yeah, the third act of any of those superhero films is just two CGI blobs fighting each other generally, and it's just exhausting.
So what advice would you give to an aspiring film editor?
I think probably it's a difficult one, because these days, back in the old days, not to sound old, but back when I started, it was a little easier to ask an editor, can I come in and can I sit behind you and just watch and watch what you do and learn, because you were sitting in front of a big film editing Steenbeck or a Chem, and you could sort of sit and watch and engage. But these days it's so closed in and it's all computer driven, so there isn't that sort of, it's a little bit more difficult to find engagement with an editor if you're just sitting in the room with them. That having been said, I think the best thing to do, if you can, is to cut stuff. It's so easy these days to shoot something on your phone or shoot something on your camera or whatever, and just sit and tinker away with it yourself. That will sort of get you involved on a personal level in sort of practicing the craft. And then on a professional level, seek out films, seek out editors, and see if you can get an internship with them. It's very difficult these days to immediately say, can I come and be your assistant, because that's a skill set unto itself. But if you can get onto film as an attachment or as an intern, or even contact an editor as a mentor, just to sort of talk to them about how they got into the business. And it's such a small world, even on this international scale that you and I are speaking on now. Even then, like, there's lots of editors and lots of assistant editors that I've met over the years who are in America, and so it actually is quite a small world, the editorial film production, feature film world. And so it's, if you ring someone up and make yourself known to them, and you'll remember those people. And then like, people will ring me and say, do you know of any assistants or any interns? And if someone's rung me up, I have their name and I can put them forward. So go out there and make yourself known, and ring up people and see if you can find an internship with on a film or whatever. That's sort of that's the best advice I can give. And unfortunately, again, there's a lot of great assistant editors out there who are looking at becoming editors. So there's always someone sort of trying to move up. But if you can get yourself in the door, then you'll be part of that circle, and you can move on with them. Definitely, if on a personal level, if you want to practice cutting, it's really easy to do these days. You can shoot whatever you want on so many different formats and cut them on your laptop. So practice. That's the best way to practice.
Finally, where can my listeners find you and connect with you?
I'm not a big Facebook user or a social media user, to be honest, but I do have a website on mattvilla.com. Yeah, just they can see what I've done and contact me through there. It's mattvilla.com.
All right, that's all for today. Don't forget you can subscribe to Kino Society on iTunes and Spotify.